Welcome to Roll Right In, brought to you by Tim from Oceanic Ventures in San Francisco, along with me, Fabian from Studio Alpha. Tim, how are you? Have a headache?
Do I have a headache?
Yeah, yesterday was Polychain Summit.
Yeah, Polychain's meet and greet investor day, and I sadly was not able to attend, but I am happy to see that investment is going in the right direction. It had a pretty rough patch when crypto hit a hitch. I've been getting very good sleep lately.
Okay. Yeah, me too. This night. Yeah.
My sleep scores are pretty outstanding, and I've tended to really fixate on them over the last year. Yeah. Tried every device you can think of, the Oura Ring, the Apple Watch, the Garmin watch, etc. And I think I've decided that I personally like the Garmin Phoenix as my sleep watch, although it's my everything watch, to be honest.
Okay, so you scan all your data and you basically double check on your health app how you sleep and everything?
Every day, yep. I look at my deep sleep and my REM sleep, obviously hours slept, awake and restless moments. And then I look at my body battery, I look at my resting pulse, and it's all pretty obvious. You know how you feel, but then when you see the data, it basically says, oh yeah, here's what happened. This is why you feel like that.
Has it improved? Has it improved when you came back from the rainforests where you took some drugs and went through this whole procedure with these Indians?
I didn't take any drugs. I drank some medicine, and everything did improve. Yeah, I would say that a lot of the distractions that I had prior to going to Peru are no longer important to me, and that's a good thing.
Okay, what is it called exactly? The whole ceremony, or like this approach of finding yourself in the forest?
It's called an ayahuasca ceremony, and it's essentially some roots from the Amazon that they cook up for many hours, like 10 hours, and it turns into effectively a tea, and you drink the tea, and then depending on...
Throw up, then you throw up?
I didn't throw up. I didn't have any of those issues myself, but certainly the majority of the people in the Maloka, which is the kind of the large hut where you sit, did have some of those challenges.
Okay.
I will say this, I came out of the experience realizing that I'm pretty blessed. I also recently listened to the TED Talk and then read some associated articles about the probability of anyone being born. And it's about 1 in 550 trillion that you as you exist right now, based on the number of people in your lineage, how they could have come together, the probability of success of mating, the number of sperm versus eggs in the actual cycle of time when it could actually happen. It's pretty mind-numbing. So the fact is, it's true, Fabio, are a miracle. The fact that you exist at all. Which actually leads me to another point. When I think of today and a lot of the kind of emails and things that I'm getting, I got one from the school today saying Hamas is going to create more terror, but in the US, against specifically Israeli businesses and Jewish people and things like that. Man, if they understood how hard it was for them to get here as far as being a human being on this planet, I wonder if they would take life so carelessly and irresponsibly. It's really horrifying and unbelievably saddening to me.
That's super sad. Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the Polychain, have you heard what they were talking about? Max, did he go yesterday?
Max was actually out with some sort of flu. It was not COVID, but he had a fever and he could not make it either. So it was...
We don't know what champagne they offered.
Hopefully at least sparkling water at this point. Want to make sure they're managing their money properly.
Can you talk a little bit about, in general, the tendency in the crypto industry, what we can expect from these companies. When will the winter be finished?
Crypto is really just one of the many, call it risk on trades that are out there. And until risk is back on, you're not going to see a whole lot in that space. When does risk come back on? Risk comes back on when the IPO market starts again. We have a really hard time in venture capital and later stage mid cap, small cap markets when we're not experiencing IPOs, because the capital that typically comes out of the ecosystem in the form of an IPO and then is reinvested into the early stage by traditional venture capitalists is what keeps the engine running. And that fuel that runs the machine is basically, it's dried up. We've had, obviously we had a Birkenstock IPO, we had Klaviyo IPO, we've had the ARM, the chip maker IPO, Instacart, and honestly,
That's it.
That's it, and none of them really did very well. You're starting to look at some companies that aren't able to find capital to the degree that they need it in the private markets, and so they're being forced to test the waters in the public markets.
Mainly driven by the investment banks, right? As discussed with Max a week ago.
Yeah, sadly, I think the investment bankers are looking for any way to generate fees. And to the extent that they can get an IPO on the books, that's a huge revenue stream for them. And so they're going to chomp at the bit to do anything that resembles an IPO at this point. Nothing's changed though, despite the fact that there were a few IPOs. It didn't. It's like you could compare it a little bit to Hamas's effort, but it didn't change anything. It's still the status quo, despite the fact that they got out.
Okay, so basically the first signal that we have to keep an eye on is when IPOs really come back. So when does that happen? Yesterday we had the inflation numbers coming out, and it looks. My feeling is a little bit that it's a no event. I'm not sure what you think, but it's no event because in the end it's higher for longer. So that's not new to the market.
And I think the market responded this morning by accelerating a little bit because it was a non-event. I don't see anything, and again, it's back to the same thread. Nothing's changing. So is the Fed going to raise rates again? I believe they will. I still see prices going up. I can tell you out here in California, gas in many places is above $6 a gallon. That's not sustainable for a lot of people as far as transportation goes. They can't continue to pay that price for fuel. And then the thought is, why doesn't everybody just switch over and get an electric car, an electric vehicle? The infrastructure doesn't support that at this time either, because the investment wasn't made in the 90s or the early 2000s that would have been necessary to support that. You probably saw the bill by Biden for $6 billion worth of hydrogen infrastructure that's going to be initiated here shortly. That's great. I think it's a good plan. Unfortunately, it's not going to help anybody in the near future, but I support it in the long run.
You think there's another 25 basis points?
Yeah, we're looking at mortgages at 8% here currently. That is so high that the housing market as it has existed in its previous form is gone. There is no housing market. No one, I don't want to say nobody, there's a bell curve. And at some end of the scale, people don't need mortgages. And at the other end of the scale, people are desperate and they're going to take whatever they can get. But that's a lot to pay for a mortgage, especially if you're not putting a whole lot down. Your chances of successfully navigating that mortgage payment for a significant period of time are potentially slim to none for a lot of people.
Yeah, but when you raise interest rates again, that then also ends up that interest rates for mortgages are getting increased.
Hopefully for a short period of time. The goal is to cool off the economy and for interest rates and Fed funds rates to decrease. But it's hard to see that happening if none of the moves by the Fed so far have really made that much of a difference.
It takes more time. That's what some people say. It takes more time. It's not necessary to have another hike. Or they just want it with another hike. They can probably accelerate that something is going to break, most likely in the real estate market, mainly in the private real estate markets, question mark.
Yeah, for sure. I think both commercial and private, both of them. But I think back to 1987 and the quote unquote crash where everybody thought the world was going to end. And the rebound was in a matter of weeks, maybe even less. And then in 2000, with the dot-com implosion, it changed the private markets. Companies that had gone public in the past with 100 million or less valuations now stayed private longer. And that's something that we're still experiencing today and may continue to experience for a long time. But the public market rebounded quickly and the housing market rebounded, and interest rates for a long time were below 5%, 3 to 5% kind of thing. This downturn is a lot different. It's much more systemic. You've got a situation where the world stopped functioning in the financial services market at the end of November 2021. We're coming up on 2 years now of literally, I would say, some pretty rough times for most people in the United States. And it was on the heels of COVID. And how much did COVID have? That's a whole nother sidebar. But we got people that are working from home and productivity is not what it used to be. And there's a whole generation that has a different perception of what work is. This isn't going away anytime soon. And what tools does the Fed have to navigate this and catalyze change? Raise rates. What else are they going to do?
Okay, so the scenario is raise rates, and then sooner or more likely something will break. We have a downturn, and then the IPOs jump into the game. Or what do you think?
Yeah, obviously this is a big reset right now. Valuations in 2021 didn't make sense. If you think about typical large cap companies, historically was a kind of a P of an 8-ish, around there. First of all, P's are undefined when you don't have any P, there's no profits. So some of these companies started doing multiples on revenues, and the multiples on revenues were in some cases over 500 times, not even this year's revenues, but next year's revenues. And clearly that wasn't sustainable. And so now we're in a situation where companies are still trying to hold on to some of the valuations that they had in 2021 and prior to that. But it's tough. People aren't spending the same kind of money. The whole advertising game is changing. Who knows what AI is going to bring to the table, but that's for a lot of people both exciting and really scary. But in terms of the reset, at some point you're going to see companies, and you've already started to see it with some companies, but the momentum is going to pick up in terms of companies doing down rounds and potentially more layoffs, and that's going to affect the job picture. And when all those things start to happen, that's when I think we start to see the economy coming back online, when people can actually raise money at a valuation that makes sense to investors. All of a sudden the machine starts running again. But right now, investors are on the sidelines. There's institutions who are doing a lot of things opportunistically because there are becoming more and more things to do opportunistically, but holistically, the landscape hasn't changed that much. There's still, I would say, a significant amount of hubris out there in the private markets from companies and employees that we had a $2.1 billion valuation at the end of 2021. Even though we're doing 100 million top line and not profitable, we're going to hopefully grow into that valuation and we won't have to do a down round before things get back on track. I don't see that happening. I think the air is going to run out. And one of the first signs of the air running out is companies laying off personnel. How are we going to cut costs? Human capital is one of the most expensive things. A lot of these companies, in terms of salary and benefits and other expenses, it costs the company $500,000 per employee. You start to do some layoffs, you realize significant cost savings, and unfortunately, that reality is happening, and it's going to continue to happen.
Okay, so when do you think? So one more time, what is the first signal that might be recognizable at the horizon when we then see, okay, now get ready, the money will jump back into the investments, the circus starts to run, and then also people are more willing to invest in the venture market, in like younger companies again?
I think when some of the more marquee names start to raise capital based on reasonable fundamentals, as opposed to the hype that they raised capital on historically. I will say companies like SpaceX are a good example. They've run up in price pretty dramatically, and yet the launch business hasn't grown that much over the past couple of years. Starlink was supposed to be the big winner. That may be a big winner, but it's taking a lot longer. Starship, the thing that was going to really drive revenue for the company because they can deliver payloads that are significantly larger than the Falcon, still hasn't successfully gotten into orbit. I believe it's successfully launched, but in the satellite business, they have something called a BFRC, which stands for a big fucking red cloud. I don't know that a BFRC is necessarily a successful event, despite the fact that it got off the pad. It's incredibly impressive that something that size and scale is, and I think it will happen. It's just a matter of time. But if you look back in the media, the company said that they would likely run out of cash 2 years ago if Starship wasn't launched successfully that year. Companies like SpaceX that have been incredibly resilient to any challenges to their valuation, I think are starting to see a little bit of writing on the wall. From my seat, I see a lot of supply in SpaceX, and I don't see a whole lot of demand right now. And the demand that's out there is not the top decile investors. Those guys are taking a little bit of a breather, and there's probably a good reason why. I'm not going to speculate, but if anybody can invest in SpaceX today, and no one could 5 years ago except for Sequoia, something's clearly changed.
Yeah, so that's an interesting mechanism. Namely, so when you go in the private market later stage, like pre-IPO stage, when you are in a certain moment, you invest in these companies like SpaceX 4 or 5 years ago, like we invested, I think, what was it, 5 years ago?
4 years ago.
4 years ago?
Roughly.
Okay, so then in this particular moment, you have a pretty big upside potential. And then now what I found interesting is that even before they make this IPO, they now have cooled down in a certain way. So we, even in the private market, even pre-IPO, we don't expect not that big upside potential anymore. So basically what we would then think is, wait, do not invest, wait till this company goes public. It will not really significantly change in the price. And then when it's public, it's another game. So you then you can invest in this company.
And there's a couple different threads on that point. Number one, I would say, if you think about 2021, I remember speaking to you back then, and my concern was there's a lot more downside in this market than there is upside. So we should be really careful about what names we participate in, because if this thing breaks, and it very well could, and it ended up breaking, and we don't have the winners, instead of buying Facebook, we bought MySpace or Friendster or something like that, we're going to lose. That's why it's important to pick the leaders. That's more of a European methodology to go with the market share leaders as opposed to maybe some of the other metrics. But in addition to that, and I'll use Facebook as an example, although there's other tangents that are important. When Facebook went public, they had a lot of investors because there were SPVs and indirect investments and double layer, triple layer things going on. So a lot of people had exposure to Facebook before it went public. And as you might recall, this is back in 2012, they went out at $38 a share and then subsequently went down below $20 a share. Facebook in the private markets hadn't traded below $20 a share since, and it was really the amount of exposure that they had that affected them. With some of these companies out there that do have a significantly large cap table because of the funds that have invested in them and the people that have indirect exposure to the name, they may not feel the need to jump in on the IPO. SpaceX could be different. Elon is incredibly unique. He's brilliant, clearly, but you can't predict the dynamics necessarily of an IPO. And the bankers too are super important, depending on the float that they decide goes out in the initial IPO. If you looked at the LinkedIn IPO, they had such a limited float, that thing screamed out of the gates. I don't know that they can engineer that the same way with a company like SpaceX, although there's lots of levers that investment bankers can pull with respect to an IPO. So yeah, I don't think there's any guarantees at all. And I do think even the most resilient companies, if this downturn continues for another year or two, they are going to start fading. They're not going away. They're still the winners. They're still the leaders. They're still going to be a great company in 10 years. But you cannot maintain a valuation that doesn't make sense forever in a downturn. Eventually, people are going to put their money in other places because they do see that there's more downside than there is upside in certain names.
So that brings me spontaneously to Unity.
Yeah.
So Unity was also a title that we were invested in the private market already. So no, they also going to have a tremendously downturn, like more 80% or more than 80% that came down from the
over 200 to I think it's 28 today.
Yeah. Okay. So now, what do you think about this title? Because they changed the pricing model in September. So they're going through a similar case like Reddit. The builders, the developers don't like it at all. Okay. A few days ago, they announced the CEO yesterday, 2 days ago, the CEO resigned. What do you think?
I've always been a big fan of Unity. I think what they have that is a really big differentiator in any company is their
over 70% of all the mobile games are built on Unity.
It's the diversity, right, of their revenue streams. They don't have one big client. They don't have one big game. They have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of games. And as a result, they're pretty well entrenched. And I do think developers appreciate their platform and will continue using it. I do think that there's a lot of synergies that exist within their ecosystem that aren't going away. I think they have had to iterate like everybody else has throughout this downturn. They went through an integration. They went and added an acquisition, company that helped them with targeted advertising and things like that. I don't think that panned out as well as it could, but I don't think Unity's going away. And I think at these levels, it's, in my opinion, and I'm not a stock picker, I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm a buyer. I think this is a 5-year, 10-year play, and I don't think Unity's going anywhere. I don't know the backstory around what happened with the CEO. I'm sure we'll find out at some point, but I know that he was a really strong component of their success, and it does concern me that he's gone, for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's a typical moment when you are basically building your company on a very nice structured price model for the developers. At some point, many other companies that they have to adapt this pricing model. So we have experienced that also with Atlassian, and always there is then the clients or the users that don't like it. It's a change. It's also often it is also for the running costs you have through these tools is then going significantly up. So of course, people don't like that. But after all, it just takes time till the market, it's getting more. Stop talking about it, because just talking about it and complaining doesn't mean that they churn.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the alternatives, right, to Unity? What's a better platform for them to spool up and train and, I guess, migrate their games to and things like that? I personally don't know of one, not that there isn't one breathing down their neck or on the horizon that I haven't heard of, I'm not aware of, but it's disruptive to change and to move platforms and to retrain everybody and to retool. We'll see. I'm still a fan of Unity.
This price model will generate much more revenue if it goes on more or less like that.
Yeah,
So
wait 3 months.
Don't lose too many users.
Wait till the next earnings cycle and
Exactly.
then let's talk about it.
Yeah, so at the moment, that's a chance to buy, as you have said, very selective, but probably that's now the chance to buy, to get into good investments that have a great future. So it looks like technology driven, it's crypto, it's AI, and it's also companies like Unity.
Yeah, I think AI is a play, not just in the private markets either. You have to look at the big guys, the Microsofts, Googles, Amazon, Facebook, Nvidia, et cetera, and how much they've benefited from AI so far and how much more they're going to benefit. And I look at the private markets, and I personally, another company I'm a big fan of is Databricks. How are they going to, what's the easiest way for them to access structured and unstructured data? There are two companies that allow you to do that are in the forefront, the leaders. It's Databricks and Snowflake. Databricks is still private. I think there's still a lot of room for growth in that company. And with the onset of AI, I think we could see some tremendous growth and a bright future, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. With the AI, I don't know if you followed it closely, but the beginning was all these companies showing up in the AI space and an investor frenzy, wanted to get into everyone because they thought, oh, this is going to be the one. This is going to be the one. And all of a sudden it turns out, oh, open.ai. And then all the public players are really what you should be focusing on. Are there secondary, tertiary names that are going to be huge? Probably, but everybody's taking a little bit of a break in terms of the AI frenzy at this point.
So then, talking about Polychain, have you heard some details, what they have said, how they see the future coming around crypto, about their investments? Is there this revolution in the financial industry? Is it close? So why did you say that these investments are on a good way in the beginning of this podcast?
Oh, because I get my monthly statements from Polychain and things are improving. Polychain has investor calls semi-regularly, and I would say that they are always of the same mindset that things are improving. And this is not just a call about here's the latest and greatest technology, but it's a sales and marketing call for investors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to paint a good picture. So I can't answer what's actually happening inside of Polychain and what they really think. I don't know.
Okay, so and Elisabeth Warren and Garry Gensler, are there going to be an issue or not really? What do you think?
In the long run, I don't think they're going to be an issue, and I don't think it matters in the short run.
Okay. Okay, so we ended up talking about politics. Let's see, when we have the midterm elections, right? Basically, it's pretty close to the big elections here in Switzerland. What do you expect?
I expect a lot of pretty ugly representations coming from most of the candidates. I think the whole Trump situation is ludicrous. He doesn't show up for debates. He's potentially a felon, a criminal. He could potentially end up in jail while he's a president. I don't even know how to wrap my head around some of this stuff, to be honest. When I was in Switzerland, I would say this was almost 8 years ago, and Trump was running for president. And I asked a few of the folks at your conference, I said, what do you guys think about what's happening in the US right now? And the answer was unbelievably consistent. It was, you guys are funny. This is just a joke, right? You're not actually entertaining having Donald Trump be the president of the United States. There's no way that could happen. And it happened. All bets are off. It's risk is off and crazy is on.
As we can see, for the Republicans, most likely we have to live with a new presidential candidate from the Republican side, which is called Donald Trump. Don't you think so?
He's the front runner. It's hard to dispute that. It's hard to understand why most people would choose him, in my mind. But you know what? I live in California, and
you're a Democrat. You're a Democrat.
I wouldn't say I'm a Democrat. I have some Republican values, but I tend to agree with Democrats on a lot of the social issues.
Okay. So then what happens when, assume this scenario with Trump, okay? Who is the best candidate from the Democratic side that can win Trump? Is it just Biden still?
I personally wish Michelle Obama would run for president.
Oh yeah, I heard about that too, but that's not the case at the moment. She waits, right?
I've heard she won't, but I would vote for her in a second. I think a lot of people would.
Okay. I think she waits till Trump has his second term, and then she will come.
Maybe. Being president is a terrible job. If you look at any of the photos of the individuals,
Trump likes it, obviously. Biden too.
Yeah, who knows? It's a good
lack
thing
of
that Biden
alternatives.
has
Lack of alternatives.
It's a good thing that Biden has a great staff, because I do worry about his health.
Yeah, they always have. Yeah. So anyway, just last but not least, what does that mean for the financial markets, for the economy in general, when we have Trump?
Trump historically has gone wherever the money is. So he's befriended Putin, right? He has befriended big oil. He has gone against any climate change initiative that has ever been presented.
Less tax for the rich.
Yeah, anything that's going to get him paid or align him with richer people than himself, he tends to gravitate towards. It's not good for the people. If you look at our economy, and Trump can say this all day long, when Obama left the presidency, the economy took off like a rocket. Trump came in and had his term. He shut down the economy over COVID, which was probably the worst idea anyone's ever made in history.
He's not the only one. He's not the only one who did.
He's one of the influential world leaders. And when he shut it down, there was pressure on other folks to do the same thing. And there were different ways to approach it. And hindsight is 2020. And I'm not going to say that him and Fauci were alone in making those decisions, but it was a bad decision. I thought it was a bad decision at the time. I tried to keep my kids in school. I thought it would be a better plan if they could wear masks and set up some plexiglass shields and things like that, so that at least they could maintain their social environment. But anyway, Trump comes in, shuts the economy down, and he leaves office. The economy's in shambles, and now we're all paying the price for all of his terrible decisions. And he points the finger at Biden. He points the finger at anybody. But the reality is, this is his fault. He created this.
I am also a little bit concerned when Trump comes back as president, what that will mean for Europe, also in the context with the Ukraine war. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have heard about that. So Poland has approved to basically strengthen their army, and they just get started to buy tons of tanks, tons of planes and weapons, and they aim to become the biggest army in Europe by far. So obviously there will be less help from the United States, which then brings European back in full responsibility.
Yeah, I decimating Ukraine and taking away all the able-bodied fighters isn't going to help Russia's cause in furthering their war effort against Poland. They'll gain a lot of great land and resources for the world economy, but I think after Ukraine, it's hard for me to believe that they will continue to keep rolling forward. There was a line out of a movie, one of my favorite movies called The Princess Bride. There's only one thing dumber than entering into a death pact with a Sicilian, and that's starting a land war in Asia. It's a bad plan. And I think Russia thought this was going to be a 3 to 9 month effort. Let's get out of there before the winter starts. And now we're years deep, and it's also horrifying. What's
Okay, so we will see. Okay, and probably Trump becomes president from the United States, and the first thing he does is he strikes the deal with Putin, and then everything will be fine again. Who knows?
Fine again, because it was fine before, right?
Yeah. So I'm not a Trump sympathisant, but yeah. Hey, Tim, thank you very much for.
And, oh, by the way, I don't know if you remember, but the border between Poland and Ukraine 100 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, was very different than it is today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Ukraine used to be Poland.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, borders do move around, but
they're not supposed to anymore, though.
But,
At least
but
not in Europe.
Murdering people against the will of the rest of the world, there's something wrong with that. Very wrong.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank God it's Friday.
Yeah, thank God it's Friday.
And yes, take care. And
yeah,
say
you too.
Hello, and yeah, get well soon, dear Max.
Dear Max, yeah, stay safe, Fabian, and have a great weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, bye.